Hey everybody, and welcome back to our AIM study in First Timothy. We are working on finishing up here in chapter 1 of First Timothy. And last time what we did is we looked at how the church needs to step into what it's called to. And that means we're going to face opposition and people who are butting up against what the church is trying to do, to aim at love with a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. And what we're going to do today is we're going to see how there are two individuals that Paul actually names that are coming up against the church and are in opposition to the church. And we're going to see what we can pull away and learn from those. So let's start at verse 18 here in chapter 1. Paul says, "This charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience." And he says, "By rejecting these, some have made shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme." In these verses, Paul is giving a stern warning to those who reject this aim of a good conscience. That's what he means by, he says, those who rejected this. He's looking back at what he was saying there, that holding faith and having a good conscience are the aim of the church. And he's saying that there are some that have rejected this. And so he gives two people, Hymenaeus and Alexander here, and Paul actually names them in the second letter to Timothy. 2 Timothy 2:17, he names Hymenaeus, and he talks about how he was one of those who swerved away from the truth and the centrality of Jesus and the gospel that we talked about earlier on in chapter 1. And then he also names Alexander in the second letter, and he says that Alexander did him great harm. Alexander hurt Paul, and whether that was with words or maybe even physically, he was aiming to come up against the church. Somebody who's doing Paul great harm is certainly not focused on love, and even then they're rejecting this good conscience that they have inside them. And so he says that they shipwrecked their faith. They made shipwreck of their faith. And if we're going to take this illustration maybe a step further, think about what's involved in a shipwreck. A shipwreck is a little different from a car accident. A car accident is something that happens quickly, right? It's something that can do a whole lot of damage really quickly. A shipwreck is different, right? Think about maybe the most famous shipwreck, the Titanic. They hit an iceberg, and you could see that iceberg way ahead of you, yet you had to have corrected the path of the ship way before they were even able to avoid that dangerous obstacle, right? It takes a long time to avoid shipwreck. And even then, if you put a hole in the hull of a ship, then it takes a while even for the ship to sink. It's slow, but it's really, really destructive. You're in the middle of the ocean. Nobody can come and save you at that point. And so if we're to think what it means to make shipwreck of your faith, it might not be one thing or one sin or one act that has actually destroyed your faith and caused chaos to your walk with the Lord. A shipwreck might be a really, really slow process. And this is probably what happened with Alexander and Hymenaeus. They were even claiming to be Christians. They thought they were on the right path, and yet when they had an opportunity to change course, they didn't. And that had really destructive results. And so Paul says here that he actually handed them over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Now, what does Paul mean, handed them over to Satan? In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he actually unpacks what he means by this, and it's in the context of talking about church discipline. And I don't know if you know this or not, but this is one of the things that the church actually does to protect itself, is the church has the ability to actually cut ties with somebody. And this is what Paul's talking about. He says, I cut ties with Hymenaeus and with Alexander. And there's two reasons for doing that. One is to protect the church and the pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith of the church from those who might be misleading and cause other people to swerve away from the centrality of Jesus and the gospel. And then the other reason why you might do that and cut ties with somebody is actually for the sake of that other person. Cutting ties with somebody helps, hopefully, somebody realize the severity of their rebellion, and hopefully it causes them to learn something from being cut off from the church. He says that they may learn not to blaspheme, that they may learn not to spread lies about who God is and what the church is trying to do. And so this is a restorative process, and this is one of the things that the church does. The aim of the church here is still love. Remember that. And by doing that, by even being able to cut ties with somebody, the church is aiming at love for those inside the church and trying to protect them from the dangers that might come up. And even the church is looking to love those that they've cut off so that they might learn something, that they can correct what was wrecked before. And so this is one of the unique ways. We call this church discipline, and it's one of the unique ways that the church aims at love. And Paul unpacks this here. What we're going to do on Thursday is we're going to give a little summary of what we've talked about in 1 Timothy chapter 1. And so make sure and just read back through 1 Timothy chapter 1. And then what we'll do next week is we'll get rolling on chapter 2. And we're just going to continue to work through 1 Timothy verse by verse so that we can see that the aim of the church is love.